the thing I wanted to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page with, the first day we kind of started, jumping right in, right? And that's how I like to do my classes, is jumping right in. Now we're gonna kind of back up and do some of the more theoretical things so that we make sure we're all on the same page. How many of you have had other communication courses? And so you have a basic idea of what it means to communicate, right? What is involved in that? How many of you have gone over the models before, the communication models? So today's going to be kind of a review, but hopefully I'll have new examples, and that'll be fun. First, before we dive in, did everybody watch the videos that I posted for last class? Fantastic. Not excellent hand raising. Fantastic. Any questions on any of those?
What's your cat's name?
Titus and Apollo. Yeah, and I wouldn't name your cat after a Roman emperor. I mean, you can do what you want. But in my experience, I wasn't the one that named him. They're actually my stepcats. Actually, I call myself a cat stepmom. Yes. So I'm a cat stepmom, meaning I raise cats that were purchased in another relationship, which is totally fine because I know that woman and I really like her. I think she's wonderful. I'm happy she doesn't date my partner anymore. But I mean, because he dates me, right? I think she's wonderful. I'm just happy about that. But yeah, so they had the cats together, and then the cats came with Matthew, and now I'm a cat stepmom, which is totally different than being a cat mom. That's not what the lecture's on today, but we can talk about that sometime. Yes, Titus and Apollo, and they're hilarious. They're wonderful. Hopefully you'll get to see more of them. Any other questions about those videos, about the messaging, encoding, decoding, sending, receiving? It's not hard. It's interesting. And how many of you listened to that and kind of went, oh, this makes a lot of sense with like the things I do in life, right? Like this makes my world make sense a little bit, even though it's not super hard or super, what is the joke? It's not rocket science, right? So from there, we're going to jump into talking specifically about models of communication. So anybody catching these readings what the three big models are? And there are other models. I'll throw one at you that's not in the book just as like a bonus, like a hey. But what are the three that the book referred to? No markers? Really? Here we are.
Oh, the dimensions, you mean?
I'm specifically talking about, they're called models of communication. The first one is you hear about it all the time. Anytime you start to study communication, the very first thing that rolls up is the transmission model. Transmission model of communication, transmission model of communication. That's like if someone says, oh, you're studying communication, what's the first thing you learned? I learned about the transmission model of communication, right? Like that's a big deal. The transmission model, and did I get the right little vowels in there? Yep. The transmission model is the idea of when the messages are sent out and it goes from there. Think of like a car, right? Like a car moving I drive from Fargo, well, Moorhead technically, but it's just down the interstate, 50 miles, right? And think of the car and the transmission in that car, right? That it's sending out messages and things happen because of those messages. The example they give in the book is radio, right? So radio is sending out messages, it's sending out a transmission. The radio doesn't know whether anyone has received those messages. And very rarely are messages sent back, right? Like every once in a while we get a caller in. But like certainly all of the people that are being touched by that message are not sending messages back. I mean, think of, how many of you went to church as a child? Most churches are set up in the transmission model, right? Person is speaking from a pulpit, message is going out. You could be receiving that message or you could be not, right? Like how many of you sat in church sometimes not listening, not receiving the message? Some education is formed this way. This is what we're doing right now, right? I'm sending out messages, you're all sort of receiving, right? It's not my preferred mode by any means. And the transmission model certainly is basic and incredibly useful, but I think it's very clear why people came along and said this isn't good enough, right? Like we need more things to help explain or help theoretically look at communication. So then the interaction model comes along. And this one, I think, really specifically deals with what we're doing in class, right? And specifically in interpersonal communication. So the interaction model is when there's a sender, Sarah, right? Excellent. So Sarah, do you mind playing along with me here?
Sure.
Okay, so I'm going to send a message to Sarah. I'm going to say, Sarah, I like your green. Is it pen or a pencil?
Pencil.
See, so she's already responding back to me. We're already having an interaction. Because before I could even compliment her writing utensil, she has to clarify what that is. So we've already had an interaction. And can you almost see, I tried to do this on the video, but can you almost see me being the sender or the source, right? And me encoding meaning, what is that, a pen or a pencil, right? And then it going to her, and then she decodes it, like what does that mean? And then she encodes meaning back, right? And then we have, and this is an interaction, right? This happens metaphorically, but we could clearly make this visible, right? You know, if every time her words came out, she was physically, like, think of her words as a physical thing, right? And then I take that thing and I unwrap it and think about it, right? And then make a new physical thing for her and hand it back, right? Interaction. Seems simple when we're talking about a pencil, but I think the interaction model really becomes beautiful when it's something with greater stakes. So, have we talked about my father yet? My father had a brain tumor no one's ever had before. I was 17 when he was diagnosed. Madison wouldn't even touch him. They sent him straight to Mayo. And then they did a surgery no one's ever done before. He used to say, I won the lottery, just the wrong one. It's hilarious. He's like one in a zillion. Yeah, he's ridiculous. And we had him for 5 more years, and we knew if the cancer ever came back that he would die. And he did. And so I tell people this pretty frequently. I use it sometimes in teaching lessons. But let's say, so I mentioned this in a class. They asked me about something, and I told them this. And one of the people in the class said, do you mind telling me more details? Because I had mentioned my father. Do you mind telling me more details about your father? Because she has a similar thing, and she wanted to know my details to compare it to her story. Notice how, I mean, and granted, in this case, there was sort of a combination of models because I was speaking to a full class, but her and I were having an interaction, right? So she's sending me a message that says, can you give me this information about your dad? And I'm saying, sure, here are the details about my dad and my specific emotional situation that happened with my family member. And then she came back even and said, oh, that's similar to mine because, like, we had this beautiful interaction, right? So notice how the interaction model fosters that when the stakes are higher, right? It's not just about a pen or a pencil. And then the third one they give you is the transaction model. And this is when that interaction, remember how I said we could make it tangible? It's metaphorical, but we could make it tangible. This is when it becomes tangible, but there's a social component. Okay? So, how many of you are from Minnesota? Anybody from Minnesota? Were all of you around three years ago when Minnesota was really doing the Minnesota Marriage Amendment? Maybe mildly remember that? The reason I love talking about it is because it was a big deal and it was nearby and lots of really cool rhetorical social stuff happened when Minnesota was trying to not let the amendment pass, or it wasn't an amendment, but in their constitution that said marriages between one man and one woman, and the state did all of this stuff, right? And the goal there, right, in those communications was to create a transaction, right? Was to create this social transaction of something being done or changed socially, right? To get this thing not passed, right? They didn't want it passed, to build something socially and in a simple term for individuals in the state to gain rights. That's how the people who were for, it's hard because they're against the amendment, but they're for queer marriage, right? Do you see what I'm saying, right? And do you see how this takes place a lot? Think of all of your group projects you've ever had, and that the communication is interactional, but also there's something transactional about them. How many of you have ever been in a group where you have to put together either a PowerPoint or a paper? How many of you love doing that? No, it's a pain in the butt, right? Because like somebody has to send me their part, and you have to send me your part. What if you don't get me your part on time? And then we have to kind of put it together, right? But there's actual building or transactional things happening when that, like within that communication. So those are the three that the book really addressed. I'm going to give you a bonus one because I'm that kind of teacher. And also, this is my field, and I think this will relate back to interpersonal stuff. Because the place I got these readings are from Basic Comm, sort of OER online resources. I'm going to add the ritual model. And the ritual model deals much more with cultural performance or basically it's a way to understand communication through building tradition, history. So how many of you just had the holiday season? How many of you have some sort of thing that you do at the holiday season, that you do every year with your family or with a group of people? Tell me about it. Somebody tell me one.
Open presents on Christmas Eve.
And open presents on Christmas Eve?
Yep.
And it has to be on Christmas Eve? Yeah? Do you have a place in the house that you do it?
Living room, upstairs living room.
It has to be the upstairs living room. You can't go downstairs?
No, our tree's always in the upstairs living room.
Has to be by the tree. Excellent. And Derek?
Yep.
Yes, Derek. Derek, I realized you and I had an online class together first semester.
Wow.
But no, I gotta look at your whole name, and then I'm like, oh, I totally know who you are. And then, do you have a place that you sit?
On the couch or...
So you don't have special places. Is there something that, so like when we open presents, everybody has to have a drink?
We do the youngest, go from youngest to oldest.
Here we go, right? So there's a way that you do it. Do you listen to anything special?
Not really, we just kind of just go around. What we do, we have to say who it's from and what it is before we go on to the next person.
So notice that that doesn't really fit a transmission model, right? Because there's interactions, but the interactions aren't specific, right? It's happening with multiple people, right? And then transactionally, I mean, I guess there's presents being exchanged, but that's not the point of the communication. The point of the communication is its ritual, right? And look at how we're about to learn some of the other pieces of these models, right, or the things that influence these models, but look at how the norms or the social things that, like, they have to go youngest to oldest, right? And how many of you have a tradition that you're thinking of that has similar guidelines and rules, right? In my house, you have to listen to Alabama Christmas. We have to play Alabama Christmas. And when my partner joined the family, he was like, this is awful. This Alabama Christmas CD is terrible. And we were like, don't care, brown hair, don't care, sit down, right? Like, we listen to Alabama Christmas. You have to, right? And so think too how you could probably track your life via the ritual communication model. I mean, how many went through either like a communion or a baptism or a, what's the 16th birthday called in Spanish cultures? Quinceanera, yeah, or a bat mitzvah, right? Graduation, did any of you have a graduation party when you graduated high school? Weddings, have you been to a wedding? Oh man, you are front and center ritual model, right? Like, whew, every communication that's happening in a wedding, from the dress, say yes to the dress, to the toast. My friend got married years ago, and they didn't have a ton of money, and she actually had a baby like before her wedding, so that was out of sync with most ritual models, right? And she wanted fake flowers. She wanted to save money. It was an environmental move too, but she was going to do fake flowers, and her husband's sister, her partner's sister, it was this like, oh, you're using fake flowers, right? There was this like critique of like not playing into the norms of the ritual, like, will you really care and remember your wedding if you use fake flowers, right? Like, so notice how there are pieces that inform these. So these are the models, right? Remember, ritual's bonus, right? But then there are contextual things that impact these, that help these make sense. And so the one that I keep referring to is the psychological context. So these are the contexts over here. And that's basically the mental and emotional stuff that impact the communication. Derek, I'm going to ask you a personal question. If you don't want to answer, just say I don't want to talk about it. The people who open presents in your family, have they always all been there?
Most of the time, yeah, unless like passed away or something.
So here's my question. Has anyone passed away?
Yeah.
Excellent. Not excellent. Not at all excellent. Not at all excellent except for my, you know what I mean, right? High five to make sure you know what I mean. Okay. But the year after someone passed away, was it different?
It was a little bit different, yeah.
Right, because the mental and emotional context had changed or been impacted. And notice too how this, how many of you have been, I just was at a funeral recently that really was using the transmission model. And it was really impacted by that. That I had to sit for an hour and absorb that communication about something so emotional and mental. It was for the mother of a childhood friend of mine. And then at one point, they changed models and they went to an interactional model and they passed the mic. Has anybody ever been to a funeral that passes the mic? And you get to share stories and stuff? Yeah. And so notice too that these are not set in stone and they can be used, they can be happening at the same time. Notice I'm using a lot of transmissional model to teach you, but then we start having some interactions, right? Another context is the social context. I love this one. Because you would think this means like people and social and chatty. It doesn't. It means norms. It means norms and guidelines. So I have a very clear memory of the day in 6th grade when Nellie Hagee and Carrie Neeson is my childhood best friend, so I think she came along to protect me mildly, but also this was very important. I mean, they cornered me at my locker and told me that we did not wear Marvin the Martian t-shirts and gym shorts anymore to school. Right? Rules. Norms. Do you have a story? Oh, have I warned you about this yet? How when you chat,
it just made me think about our childhood.
Yeah, can you do you have a story?
Not really.
Not a specific one. Makes me think of Mean Girls, right? What is it? Pink on Wednesdays? Yeah, Pink on Wednesdays. And if it, right, and it's so great when they make her get up off the table. Have you seen Mean Girls? Right? That's the social context. Like, leave. You violated the social contract. Leave, right? This too, I think some of the best examples come from middle school, but there's so many different aspects to this. My mom's coming next week. She's gonna come visit, so don't tell her how much I talk about her, okay? I mean, she knows, but like, don't tell her specific stories. She'll get embarrassed. That's not true. She does get embarrassed. Wait till you meet her. Okay, so Mama O was just telling me recently, like, didn't I want to buy a house? Don't I want to buy a house and get equity? Don't I understand, how I'm throwing money away paying rent? And like, I don't have a life where I live in some place knowingly more than a few years. I mean, I've been here, this is my 6th year here, but like, that wasn't a plan. My contracts have been renewed. Do you see what I'm saying? I don't have tenure anywhere. I for a while thought maybe I would move to the cities to live with my partner. In the end, he moved to me, which was great. But right, that social norm of like, eventually you buy a house, right? You get equity. That's the social context. That's the norm or the thing that we do in this culture, right? So see how vast that contextualness is. Any questions on either of those? Or stories? I'm slowly warming you up. Some of you are playing along. Like some of you want to talk. But soon, we'll talk more soon. Relational context. And this is, right, the persons or types of interpersonal contacts that you've had. Not just the relationships, but also the timing, the temporal, or the memory of those relationships. So how many of you have ever had someone say, oh yeah, and then recently I met so-and-so, and you have a very strong, either positive or negative, opinion of so-and-so, right? And then you have to decide how much you're going to reveal about that prior relational context, which is going to impact your interactional communication with the person that you're talking to. I recently had a friend come visit. We were talking about this mutual friend, and they made the comment like, I think he's one of the kindest people I've ever met. And she goes, good, I'm glad that you do. I think that he's lazy and sometimes takes credit for other people's work. And I was like, oh, good to know, right? Like a totally different relational context. And also I think this calls to what's happening in your life. So how many of you have had some sort of breakup or separation, either romantic or friendship, right? Really? No, I was like, are you just not raising your hands, or are you all in really loving relationships? Hopefully that's the case. And how many of you, when that was happening or after that was happening, made friends with someone else, or started dating someone else, right? And that relationship feels different in light of the separation. Right? I think you can do it with death too, right? Like if I have that movement of that relational thing happening, that the other things mean something different because of this relational thing happening. Does that make sense? Wish I could tell more stories there. It's kind of hypothetical, but questions on that? And then finally, the cultural context. This is all the juicy stuff. Race, class, religion, ability, right? This is all of these combined and then mixed together with other people. Cultural context. My sister teases me because we joked a few years ago about having superpowers. So my sister's superpower is that she can burp or fart on command. I'm gonna close the door now. And her friend Morgan's superpower is that she can take a shirt that's inside out and in one fell swoop put it on right side in. That's Morgan's superpower. And so of course I wanted a superpower. I said, what's my superpower? And my sister said, without hesitating, your superpower is that you can make an entire room uncomfortable in a matter of seconds. Yeah, I said, thanks, right? A couple days later, we were at Culver's with some family friends, and they were talking about something, and I was like, oh, do you know Jessie Curval? She's a lesbian writer that used to teach at Madison, and she blah blah blah, and lesbian lit, and blah blah blah. And I think I said the word lesbian like 3 or 4 times at Culver's with these family friends. And my sister leaned over and was like, "You're using your superpower, right? Like you're making everybody uncomfortable, right? Because in our culture, right, I'm violating the cultural context. That's not a cultural space in which we're comfortable using the term lesbian. Yesterday, I did an MLK panel at Concordia College. And I used the word vagina, like just really casually. And I think I even referenced my vagina. And said, right, like, which is really uncomfortable right away before people realize, like, that's not new information. Like, they'd be more uncomfortable if I confessed I didn't have one, right? So, and so this is where we start to, like, reference race, class, sex, ageism, right? All of that stuff. How many of you have ever said something and then looked around and thought, I maybe shouldn't have said that in this type of group of people? Right? Well, yeah, here's it. Yeah, goose. I'm not surprised, right? Like, whoops, right? And so that's, and notice how, again, these are separate contexts, but notice how they connect to each other, right? Like, and weave back and forth. And so all of these contexts are impacting these transitional, or these models of communication, right? So it's starting to make sense theoretically how we communicate and how that makes sense, and how the video about the sending and the receiving and the encoding and decoding, wasn't Matthew Gray, wasn't he wonderful in that video? Do you see how that adds into all of this and starts to connect to make sense of what we do every day all the time without thinking about it? Yeah, again, simple but interesting. Questions on any of this, or stories or thoughts?
I don't really understand the transaction model, like at all. I don't understand why.
Remind me your name.
Caleb.
Kayla, excellent. Kayla, what's something you care about in life?
Animals.
Excellent, excellent. Have you been apprised lately to some of the food consumption stuff that's happening? Like the bird flu that's killing off fowl, right? Or about how we treat our animals before they're slaughtered in houses, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, mildly like that. And so, are you familiar with PETA?
Yes.
Yeah, yes, unfortunately, right? And so PETA is a great example of how their communication fits into that transactional model, right? PETA's goal often in their communication is not to preach, comes off preachy, but right, like they're not up at a pulpit sending out messages that they don't know if they're getting anything back. PETA always gets messages back and they know it, right? But it's not interactional, right? They're not having a friendly conversation. They're not like sitting and saying, well, here's why I choose to be a vegan, right? Like, what are your thoughts on that? It's not interactional. They're making shit happen, right? Like they want laws to change, transaction. They want people to stop eating meat, transaction. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, now I think with PETA, what's great is we pull them to these contexts, right? Like, how are these impacting how effective their transactional communication is, right? But see how they fit that model of having an interaction with the public, but that means something socially, right? Where that changes something logistically. Does that help?
Yeah.
Yeah. I also, I'll bring it back to the personal level. I have a friend, I have a dear friend who I used to coach with, and I miss him a lot. And I think about him a lot, but I haven't been communicating with him. I just forget to text him or whatever. And I needed a favor. I need something on one of my old Moodle pages, and he does tech at the place I used to work. And so I texted him last night, and the first thing I texted him was, "Hi, friend, I miss you. We're here," right? We're having an interaction. And then I said, "Hey, favor, do you have access to my old Moodle pages? Because I need this article and I can't find it." So now I've gone from interactional to I want something, right? Transactional. I want him to give me access to my Moodle pages or to get it to me. And then he called me later, so now we're even doing a different type of communication, right? Because remember, what is when I text and he doesn't answer right away? Louder. Asynchronous, right? So then he called me so we could communicate. Louder, Tim. Synchronously, right? Remember the difference between those? Synchronous happens right away in real time, asynchronous not in real time. And so, Kayla, we've moved to a transactional model where out of that communication, I want something social or tangible. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So is transaction just basically doing something to try to get something in return?
Yes, but it's because the transactional could be metaphorical, right? Like so my best friend who lives in New York, his name's Brad. Have we talked about Brad yet? He's my everything. He's amazing. Brad is not the man I live with, not the man I own cats with. That you would call my partner, and that's like it looks much more like a traditional relationship. I'm also in love with Brad, but we don't make out. We're just the bestest of friends, but I think that's a totally inadequate term to deal with that relationship. So Brad and I will often text each other and say, "Tell me I'm pretty." And pretty is an all-encompassing term for us. It means tell me I'm doing a good job. I'm having a bad day. Tell me I'm right. Like, tell me I'm doing a good job. And one time I texted him and said, tell me I'm pretty. And he said, oh, you are a beautiful mermaid who has been caught among the rocks. And soon you will be swimming with the fishes once you get past this bitter coral reef or something like that. And while that is interactional, it's also transactional, right? Like, he's feeding me self-esteem, right? Like, I'm asking for that. I think about transaction with my partner a lot of the time, right? He empties the dishwasher all the time. He is the dishwasher fairy. We spoke of the dishwasher fairy in my house as a child, but it never came. I live with the dishwasher fairy. It's magical, right? And there's something transactional about that communication, right? About that. I'm gaining something by that. In return, I do the hand dishes. But it's another story. Okay, any other questions? Kayla, thank you so much for being brave and saying, I don't get this, explain it to me. Anything else that we don't quite get or that you want more on? Okay, great. I'm gonna stop the video. Oh my gosh, so much.